Hi guys, welcome back to F1 News. As Mercedes continue to struggle to find answers to their car woes this season, it seems Hamilton's move to Ferrari next year is once again an inspired decision given the growing strength of the Scuderia right now, but Mercedes will not make it easy for their star man. It seems he wants Peter Bonnington, his race engineer, to go with him. Mercedes are not, it seems, going to allow that to happen. That means far more we are checking it next season for Hamilton, far less it's hammer time Lewis next season. How is that going to affect his move and his development at the Scuderia, but also what does it mean for Mercedes and which other people will they try and keep hold of? Very much into your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. First of all, we talked a lot about the tyres yesterday and my frustrations and James Allison's frustrations with the tyres as they currently exist in the sport. Now, today there was some news on whether the tyres are going to change substantially for 2026. They will be different. They won't be the same tyres in size, in compound, these other things for the 2026 regs because the cars are very different. Their requirements will be rather different. Will they be any good still, the tyres? Because I don't personally think they are at the moment. That is another question. But they are set to actually stick with the 18-inch rims, which is what we have now. Of course, you guys remember a few years ago it was 13-inch rims, substantially increased for the 2022 regulations. There was a big debate over the last several months, I imagine, between whether they would stay 18 inches or go down to 16-inch rims. Now, I'm pretty sure Mario Isola of Pirelli still says that the tyres will be smaller for the new cars, but the rims will be the same. And there was some debate, really, behind the scenes on whether they would change or not. The frustrating part about this, I think, to me is that, look, I don't know if the 18-inch or the 16 inches are going to be better. Maybe it doesn't matter. But Pirelli were the ones that effectively made the call on this. They are the tyre manufacturer, and sure, they have something to say, and they talked about, well, you know, we don't really think it's worth it, and like from a marketing angle, we think that it's probably best to keep it as it is and all this type of stuff. And I'm like, well, surely the F1 guys or the FIA, they should be the ones making the decision. They should be telling Pirelli, hey, we want you to make the tyres like this, so off you go and make them, rather than Pirelli saying, well, actually, no, we're not so sure we want to do it like this. So, yeah, they've abandoned a proposed switch to 16-inch tyres in 2026. I don't really like the sound of this. I think the tyres are a massive problem in this sport right now. We have discussed that in depth yesterday, if you guys want further analysis on that. However, we've got lots to say as well on even the Red Bull saga. Again, there have been some further updates to this. There always will be until this eventually comes to a conclusion. It doesn't seem like that is going to be likely anytime soon. So the Telegraph, the UK Telegraph, reported on this the other day and gave an update. Rather different in terms of reputation, you could argue, to the Telegraph, which is the Dutch version in some respects in terms of how they are perceived by the wider public. But yeah, the Telegraph in the UK said the following, discussing the leaks and everything that's happened over the last couple of weeks behind the scenes. Now, there seems to be an update on what's happening with the accuser herself, because there was rumours that she'd been offered 650,000 euro, or maybe it's 650,000 pounds, 700,000 euros to effectively just drop the case and go away type thing. And apparently Red Bull themselves bumped that up to $1 million. That was the rumour the other day. She may have said no to that situation and is now looking to go one step further because the employee who accused Team Boss Horner has now decided to appeal again. This is coming out from Eric van Haren of De Telegraaf in the Netherlands. We know that he has very close connections with Jos Verstappen, who said in his paper, in his reporting just the other day, if Horner stays, the team is going to explode. It's not going to happen, and Jos Verstappen effectively played his hand at that point. Today we have new information that the woman in question has recently hired a new lawyer. Initially, she only had 5 working days to appeal after receiving the official paperwork following the investigation that Horner was effectively cleared. 5 working days doesn't maybe seem like much, but apparently by changing lawyers, she's been able to get more time to decide to do this, and now she is going to go forward with it. So yeah, another twist in the tail, right? Because there's obviously been a feeling from many of the community, but also Ford and, you know, Honda and other partners. It's like, all right, Red Bull, are we sure that this investigation that cleared Horner was done transparently and fairly, and did it come to the correct decision? Especially because, you know, those leaks are out there publicly, and of course people have seen them and people have given their thoughts on them. It was a surprise to many that Horner was cleared of all wrongdoing and it's business as usual. Clearly for the woman in question, it ain't business as usual, and she's still working behind the scenes to, well, take further repercussions, I suppose, rather than taking the apparent money that was offered and just walking away. So yeah, Horner will of course try and hold on to his power at the team. That may change if this goes anywhere, if the appeal is actually anywhere near successful. I guess we'll see over time. This, by the way, as another Dutch kind of newsletter, news magazine or whatever put together, is the rumoured power struggle just in like a graphical format. Like, these are the key protagonists and antagonists, I suppose, of the story. There's a couple of other names we've mentioned over the last few days that don't really exist on here, but this is what is happening effectively behind the scenes at Red Bull. It's an absolute mess, of course, as you can tell. First of all, one thing that you will note is that Horner is effectively the node in the center of all of this. Horner single-handedly, well, not single-handedly, but, he holds it together in some respects, but also he is creating the friction, right? If you look at the lines that he is connected with, the only person on this that he doesn't have a strained relationship with is the big dog, effectively. Now, Javidja, the 51% owner. His relationship with Mark Mateschitz, the Austrian side, is reportedly tense. Same with Oliver Mintzlaff, who is effectively, with Mateschitz and Marco. That relationship is tense. Reported power struggle between Marco and Horner. This is translated from Dutch, so maybe the translations aren't perfect, but this cooled down bit with Verstappen effectively means like frosty or like a cold relationship, or it's gone cold or something to that effect, right? So it's not like they are seeing necessarily eye to eye. Verstappen and Horner, certainly as a result of the very stretched and strained relationship between Jos and Horner, and even they're reporting that the relationship between Newey and Horner is similar to how it is with Verstappen and Horner in terms of it's a bit frosty, it's a bit strained, it's a bit stretched. So it does seem like really the only man that's keeping Horner around is Javidja, who they get along well, and from the the ownership angle that we've discussed in depth over the last week or so, that is probably why this remains true. But if the rumours are true that Walmart are threatening to pull Red Bull out of their stores if Horner stays, or if they aren't more transparent about the situation, maybe things will change. But reportedly, as well, as Eric Van Haren said in his article, over the Jeddah weekend and even this week, there was many discussions had to try and calm things down. And that may happen for the meantime. But as Joe Soward said the other day, he feels like heads will roll. It is simply a matter of time to decide whose heads will roll in this circumstance. So as you guys can see down on the bottom left side, good relationship, of course, between Verstappen, his father, and Helmut Marko. That is one camp. They're quite close to Mintzlaff. But, there's a big battle here really between Mateschitz and Javidja. It's just an absolute mess, isn't it? From the top down. And this is kind of, maybe it starts in the top right. You've got the Austrian side of the business. Mateschitz, of course, son of Dietrich Mateschitz, who was, really the big dog in charge, but now effectively he's passed away, the talisman of the business in many ways. Javidja, who really owns the whole thing, now he wants more control of where the company goes. So it's an absolute mess, and Horner is slap bang in the middle of it, right? And, just to keep in mind, this is Red Bull owners, right? This isn't Red Bull Racing, this is Red Bull as an entire business, which just shows how much of a big deal this is, and the trickle-down effect when everything blows up, which it certainly will be pretty mega. But many decisions, much scheming, I'm sure, to be happening behind the scenes to determine exactly what happens when that is the case. We've got to talk, though, about Lewis Hamilton going to Ferrari because, he joined Mercedes back in 2013, seemed at the time like a highly questionable move to leave McLaren, but it was very much inspired. He had the conversations at the time. He announced when he joined Ferrari, he felt parallels to his decision back then to his decision now. There's obviously questions for Ferrari. What do you do with your driver lineup over the coming seasons? Behrman impressed massively in Jeddah, and even Fred Vasseur has been asked about this and said, look, how about when Hamilton goes at some point, you get Behrman in? And not a bad idea, really, but Vasseur's like, look, all right, let's calm down here a little bit. Hamilton isn't even in our team yet. Let's not talk about after Lewis Hamilton, all this type of stuff. And look, at the end of the day, Behrman's done one race weekend. Yes, he was very impressive, but so was Nick de Vries on his weekend. So was Liam Lawson in the time that he had in the car. So, it's not to say that, okay, he had a great weekend. Does that mean that Behrman is going to be a consistently top Formula 1 driver? I've said for a long time he's got a lot of potential, and he couldn't have done a better job than he did. But still, it's only one race. We'll see what he does in the Haas potentially next season, and then whether he, will be developed into Ferrari-level driver in due course, because it ain't easy to be a Ferrari driver. And Behrman was officially the youngest ever British driver and the youngest ever Ferrari driver, but even getting selected as their primary reserve driver is a massive achievement in and of itself for the circumstances that then arise. But we'll speak about Ferrari with Hamilton in a second. Firstly, really, it's about the push factors, because Hamilton seemingly felt over the last several months the team wasn't moving in the direction that he'd hoped. Yes, they have made some adaptations to their car. Their car at Bahrain looked far better than it did for last season and the year before that, but as soon as they turn up to Jeddah, all of a sudden, they have major deficits in the higher speed corners, not generating anywhere near the downforce they were expecting to. They suffered from bouncing as well in the car, especially during qualifying, and like, if there's one circuit you don't want the car to be bouncing around and being somewhat unstable, Jeddah is the one, because that is going to kill the confidence of your drivers through these corners if they don't feel like they fully have the car underneath them, and they just didn't really have any downforce in Sector 1. The floor was not generating the performance they expected. Now, whether that's a ride height thing, whether it's a suspension thing, we just don't know. My feeling is that it's got to be something floor related at that point, because you know, when they do the simulations, when they look at the wind tunnel, you can see what the wings are going to do. But the floor, that's the complicated part of the simulation, right? Is when let's say you're riding over this curb here, like they are in this image. You can't really, it's difficult to simulate this. The calculations must be incredibly complex when it comes to the surface of a track, the slight contours and bumps the track have. Like, that's the type of thing that in a simulation it's really difficult to implement. You can probably get a good idea what the rest of the car is going to do through the air. But when it comes down to interactions with the floor and the grounds, that is clearly a very complicated part of the sport, and maybe Newey can see this stuff in his mind. But Mercedes clearly cannot, and they have been struggling to figure out what went wrong in Jeddah, that they had no performance in Sector 1, slower than Alpine, slower than Sauber, slower than Williams. It was just a bad time. So Andrew Shovlin says the following: there's definitely data we're picking through from Jeddah. They have another few days before Australia to get this thing ready, but looking at the data from the Bahrain race, the test, and coming up with a plan for how we approach free practice in Melbourne, because you guys probably remember in Jeddah, they did FP1, they weren't really on the ball, and they changed everything, right? Hamilton and Russell had entirely different setups going forwards, because they were trying to figure out, how do we get some grip in Sector 1, how do we get some downforce, but it just wasn't happening. There's a lot of work going on in the aero department, vehicle dynamics department. We are trying to design some experiments there that will hopefully give us a good direction that is good for performance. So is there anything more concerning for a driver, for the team to say in year 3 of the regulations that, yeah, well, we're doing some experiments here, guys, to try and figure out what is going wrong? Because let's not forget, Australia 2022, that was the race where Hamilton was running all sorts of sensors on the car to try and figure out what was happening. Here we are 2 years later, and it's the same story again, when they're trying to find some sort of experiments they can try to figure out where the downforce is going missing from. So it seems like this weekend, or this upcoming Grand Prix for Mercedes, is not about winning, not about even getting a decent result. Their plan is to figure out where the losses are coming from and what direction they can potentially take. Meanwhile, Red Bull, Ferrari, Aston Martin, McLaren, they seem relatively comfortable with what they have, and therefore they can follow a pretty traditional development program over the course of the year. Mercedes are yet again struggling to figure out how to even develop the car because they don't know what's wrong with it. So it is embarrassing. I said this the other day, it's straight up embarrassing. Year 1 for Mercedes, sure, you've won 8 constructors in a row. Year 1 in 2022 for Mercedes, you know, you fall off the boil a little bit, you finish 3rd in the constructors, it happens. Second year, to stick with the car concept largely, was pretty bad, but I mean, this year's just straight out embarrassing for a team of Mercedes caliber to still not understand exactly what is going on, and arguably have, based on the first 2 races, a worse car than the last 2 years. Like the W13, for all they criticised it, Mercedes, may well go down as their most successful car of the ground effect era so far, which is remarkable to think about, but the more you think about it, the more you arguably see what Hamilton saw potentially behind the scenes at Mercedes over the last several months, why he's decided to go elsewhere, what Hamilton thinks about this as well, because while I'm sure he wants to do as well as he can in the final season, the car isn't really there underneath him. Not like he's driven great anyway so far. Okay, he did pretty well, I think, in Jeddah, defending from Piastri and what ended up being the slower strategy based on the safety car timings and all this type of stuff, the risk that Mercedes took, and I think it was a good risk to take, but didn't work out in the end because there was no more safety cars, the cars don't break down anymore, and once Stroll has crashed out, there are fewer options for other drivers to bid it into the wall and crash, of course, but I still think it was a decent risk to take. And in Bahrain, the cooling issues were affecting the car multiple tenths per lap in performance. But whatever he thinks about the situation, he's got to be happy that he's made the decision to go and join Ferrari. The question is, however, will he get his own way at Ferrari? Because if you're Mercedes, there is no secret, you are you understand what's going on. Talent has been lost over the last few years. Engine guys, aero guys, of course, Loic Serra on his way out as well to Ferrari in the very near future as well. So big questions at Mercedes, and they've hemorrhaged lots of talent over the last few years. They can't really afford that to continue. And look, I'm sure that Toto wants to do right by Lewis, but that doesn't mean that for the organisation, what Hamilton wants is necessarily for the best, because when Hamilton was rumoured to be, well, actually, when it was confirmed to be leaving the team, reportedly, he wanted to take Peter Bonnington, his race engineer, and of course, potentially Andrew Shovlin as well, with him to Ferrari. Now, potentially, they can come to an arrangement where that could happen, and I'm sure, well, I'm pretty confident at least, those guys would be very keen to follow Hamilton. Yes, there are other factors in play. Moving to Italy is one big thing, all the relocation, the family stuff, all the other complications that are involved in that. But, it's something that I imagine those guys would be at least interested in considering. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what Mercedes and Ferrari can say and do on the matter. So this was an article that came out today discussing that Hamilton's race engineer for next year is effectively now set in stone. In the margins of the Hamilton to Ferrari announcement, lots of talk about the technical consequences, discussions about Peter Bonnington, who worked with, and I can't believe this, by the way, look, it's the Italian media, right? So you just got to take it as it comes. But I think they use the term Re Nero. So, literally Black King is what it means. Like, it's just funny, I don't know. They don't mean it offensively, obviously, but come on, I just thought it was interesting to say the very least on this descriptor of the soon-to-be Ferrari driver. But as they say, however, in this case, the anti-poaching clause significantly complicates the hypothetical exodus of Bono towards undoubtedly more pleasant shores from a meteorological point of view, right? Saying, look, come to Italy, it's nice weather over here, and that, of course, is true. So there's obviously discussions on Hamilton and the situation and exactly who his contract is going to be with in terms of race engineering, and it seems like the German team, Mercedes, have an anti-poaching arrangement where, let's say a driver were to leave, it's not really possible for them to go and swoop in and sign those guys, because, Mercedes are in a bad enough spot already. The prospect of losing Hamilton, Bono, Shovlin, and other top senior guys that they really cannot afford to have happen. Now, I guess my question would be, is this only a time frame thing? Because realistically speaking, if, let's say, Bono or Shovlin, they wanted to go with Hamilton next year to Ferrari, already Mercedes might say, well, there's going to be some sort of, gardening leave clause, right? For Loic Serra, he can't just leave and go to Maranello straight away. They had to work that out a long time in advance, and he still hasn't gone yet. He's still going through the gardening leave process. That certainly would apply to Shovlin, as from the engineering side. From Peter Bonnington, who's the race engineer, slightly different role. Maybe there's an argument that gardening leave contract clause doesn't exist to the same degree, but if there's an anti-poaching clause, then, well, it doesn't matter. Now, maybe it's still possible that Bono could join in 2026. I don't think that's out of the realms of possibility that a couple of those guys could come along to Ferrari somewhat later, but in all likelihood, Hamilton and Peter Bonnington's partnership will probably come to an end. And there's discussions on Ricciardo Adami, who was Vettel's engineer, race engineer, was Sainz's engineer, and was actually with Behrman this past weekend. And the article here is kind of gassing him up and saying how much of a good job he's done, which maybe is absolutely fair enough. But of course, Hamilton knows Peter Bonnington very well. They have been a duo for a very long period of time. They understand each other on a very deep level. So surely it's going to be a loss to Lewis to have a different race engineer going forwards. I'm sure it's not going to be the end of the world, but I think for Bono and Hamilton both, really, it's going to be a bit of a loss. So then I guess one of the questions would be, is it going to have any impact on the actual in-race situations? We know that, Bono and Lewis get along very well. It's Hamilton and Lewis and all this type of stuff, right? The radio conversations they have, they get down to the media things. They understand each other in the same way that GP, Gianpiero Lambiase, and Max Verstappen understand each other very well indeed. That is a bridge that needs to be crossed, shall we say, if you were to join somebody else. And this I just thought was pretty funny going around Twitter, really. Good luck, Lulu. We are thinking of plan B, says Ricky on the race engineering to science. What was plan B, Ricky? I forgot. And, I'll let you know, he says. Even he doesn't know, right? And he's not the we are checking guy. That's Xavi, who is Leclerc's race engineer. But they still say it sometimes, right? And, of course, he was on the radio to Sainz when Sainz was telling him to stop inventing and all this stuff back at Silverstone 2022. So, the question is really with Ferrari, from an operational perspective, whether they really is dialed in. And if you want to compare race engineers that are a pretty crucial part of the success of teams and drivers, obviously not as critical as the car or the drivers themselves, but they're not far away. Ferrari have been called into question on that department for some time. So the fact that Hamilton maybe can't get the man that he wants is interesting, but the article did say, actually, as we see here, he is significantly prepared to team up with the 7-time world champion, a solution also appreciated by Lewis, apparently. So apparently Lewis is happy with it. He's not, too frustrated with the situation, but I imagine that in an ideal world, Mercedes had probably thrown a spanner in the works of what Hamilton was trying to achieve, but more than likely, he probably expected this to be the case as well. So Hamilton, Twitter your thoughts in the comments below. Just one final thing to mention, this is what Lawrence Barretto put together as his predictions for next year's driver lineup. Now, some of this is good, some of this I think is pretty bad. Intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. I mean, we know what Ferrari's going to be. We're pretty damn confident what McLaren is going to be. Outside of that, there's lots of questions, really. So he's gone for Danny Rick into the Red Bull, which I think is a very low chance right now. Like, Perez is doing a stellar job in that Red Bull car as it stands. He's doing exactly what he needs to do. He doesn't seem too focused on Max, and if he can keep up the kind of level that Perez is performing at, why wouldn't they keep him around again? Like, I mean, that's what he's got to think about, right? Is the way he's driving now, if he can maintain it, unlike he did last year, they would probably keep him around over other options if Max is to stay, and he may not stay, and that is of course another debate entirely. Ricciardo, I just don't see it personally. I feel like if Ricciardo continues on the path that he's down, this might be his last year in the sport, unless RB are really just all in it for the marketing dollar, which they probably are, and therefore keep Danny Rick around because good sponsorship stuff and all that. So, he's gone for Lawson and Tsunoda in the RB, doesn't even know where Ocon's going to go, if anywhere, which is kind of strange, I think. He's got Sainz going to Aston, I'm not really so sure on that. Antonelli, Albon in the Williams kind of does make some sense, and actually Hulkenberg to Sauber I do think is very plausible indeed, and Behrman and Magnus in the Haas also make sense. So I don't mind some of this, but other parts of it I'm not particularly convinced by, but very much enjoyed your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.